Everyone has fears and feels fear. The nature of fear breeds from unfamiliarity, and that in turn gives way to lack of confidence and assurance. Fear is a tricky little bastard. On one hand, we want to avoid them altogether. On the other, we desperately want to see or feel what lies on the other side of those darkness. We want to avoid getting hit, but on the other hand, we also want to be able to take many hits. Many people say that fear is all an illusion. I prefer a better term, a natural protection mechanism. You see, gentlemen, fear is our built-in instinctual response to threatening stimulus or circumstances based upon the incomplete judgments created by our own initial perception of them, and it can be amplified or dimmed down through the collective perceptions from other people. For example, if we fear depths because we've never been to deep waters before, our sense of fear can be further amplified or dimmed by other people's judgments of depth. If a person adds, "Be careful of deep waters, a lot of sharks will be coming after you," it will inevitably amplify our sense of fear. But if a person adds, "Not to worry, it's so much easier to swim in deep waters," it will make us feel more at ease or at least less anxious about the circumstance. The truth about fear is that it's not so much about the circumstances that we are dealing with that makes us refuse to partake, but more towards the question of our lack of ability and assurance to handle and accept the consequences should the fear manifest itself into reality. Physical pain, emotional pain, damage to self-esteem, demoralization, missed opportunities, ruined reputation, self-deprecation, and other negative effects. So it's not so much about how deep the water is that gets us pissing our pants, but more towards our incapability to handle the circumstance if we become helpless in deep waters, or if sharks actually do come for us and bite our legs, that prevent us from going into deep waters. It is not so much about talking to women that scare us men, but it is more towards getting bombarded by the personal effect of shame and failure if we do get rejected, criticized, or even humiliated by them, that prevents us from making the first move. So how can we get rid of this uneasy feeling when we're trying to break our chains and start taking on new endeavors? Well, I believe you gentlemen knew or at least have anticipated this one coming. There is no magic pill or shortcuts towards overcoming fear, gentlemen. The only way you could get yourself around it is to eventually familiarize yourself with the circumstance you are dealing with. If you are afraid of failure or falling short of expectations when trying out or performing a certain endeavor, you have to fail a lot to eventually get accustomed to the cause and effect, relationship, and sensation of failing. Same thing when it comes to rejections, criticisms, and humiliations. Only then will your mind develop the capacity to accept the risks or consequences that comes with a circumstance and eventually have the capability to put those fears aside and then concentrate on finding ways to perform better in those endeavors. You can certainly make good preparations to reduce the chances of failure and your fear manifesting itself into reality. And you can certainly change the narrative of fear itself so that you become more eager to approach and undertake them. But if you want to be comfortable in the face or midst of fear, you have to experience them enough to eventually get used to them. Of course, it is different when the risk involves death, where there are no second chances if you fail. You have to prepare as best as you can or bring yourself to accept the consequences from the beginning. And that is something only every man can speak and decide for themselves. Now, in terms of familiarizing yourself with fear, it's not always about jumping straight into the fire or taking a huge leap of faith. Be smart and methodical about it. Introduce ladders of progression or a system of development in order to baby step your way to more demanding and risky assignments. It's not always a wise decision to go big and take massive risks, as the magnitude of the consequences are more likely to be too overwhelming for us to handle and accept. Like, don't pluck yourself from a kid's pool and then drop yourself straight into the Mariana Trench. Don't go from casual highway street racing to racing in Formula 1. Don't put a level 1 character straight into a level 100 map, obviously. For example, and this is a method that I personally use, if you have social anxiety and you're trying to familiarize yourself in talking with the opposite sex, you certainly can go directly to a public place and strike an interaction. But if you have severe social anxiety or great fear in approaching and talking to a woman and you never got out of your room to actually interact with one, it might not be the best method to get used to and overcome that crippling anxiety. Instead, like I've mentioned, create a system of progression for yourself. Start by initiating conversations with women whose occupations are to talk to you and interact with you, such as a salesperson, bank tellers, and cashiers. These people are there to serve you, so no matter how awkward it gets or if you fail to make the conversation as smooth as it can be, the consequences aren't that high to the point where you'd get physically or mentally overwhelmed. As you get comfortable and become more confident, you can move towards initiating conversations during mutual gatherings and events, like a marathon, wine convention, or even a high school reunion, for example, where you are there for the same purpose as them, so the topics for conversations are more saturated or concentrated and less random, so you don't have to scratch your head so much. Then, as you get comfortable with that, from there on you can start cold approaching at a local coffee shop you usually go to. Then you can progress to more crowded places like the museum or art gallery, then the pub, and so on. So essentially, you are putting yourself in a circumstance where the challenges are not too far off from your degree of competence and confidence, which in turn would minimize or scale down the damage caused by the fear should it come into fruition. Keep in mind, this is my own method, and there is no absolute method to familiarize yourself towards a fearful circumstance. It's all up in the air for you gentlemen to create, cultivate, and improvise on your own with regards to your own magnitude of fear. Another thing to take note is that we always have to remember that certain things are out of our control. So to fear the uncontrollable, especially with regards to future outcomes, is as degrading as trying to control the weather. It is unnecessary and a waste of time to significantly overthink them and fixate too much about them. Fear always exists. When we overcome one, another will show up. Our attitude towards fear will always default to avoiding it completely because of our survival instincts. Slowly and gradually changing our approach towards fear is the answer to eventually having the courage to face them, because there is no courage without fear. Just remember, gentlemen, the consequences of facing fear may be painful at first, but they always lead to growth. Because growth always comes from discomfort, remember? However, the consequences of avoiding fear, on the other hand, often leads to regrets and disappointment for prematurely underestimating our own potential. Thank you for watching.